and welcome to the third of our Bedrock interviews with our contributors, where we sit down with them over a cup of tea to get to know them a bit. Today we're joined by Jake Hatton, who wrote a wonderful article in our March issue all about walking the land. And just a reminder, if you don't know already, our June issue, issue number 2, has now come out. We actually have 15 articles in this one as opposed to the 12 we got in the March issue because of just the number of people who sent in pictures to us, which we thought fitted with the Bedrock vision. So make sure, if you haven't picked it up already, you go and get that now. But yeah, Jake, lovely to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Thank you, yeah. And thank you for your wonderful article. So you're writing about hiking and the value of hiking, what sort of what you like about it. When did you first start sort of hiking for pleasure and why?
I think I was quite lucky in that I did a lot of walking with my family when I was younger. My parents were both big walkers themselves, but particularly as a thing to do together. And so as kids, whenever there was a free weekend, especially a bank holiday, or even if it was just, a morning on a Saturday before going to do something else, it was, let's get the dogs in the car, let's drive off somewhere and go for a walk. Or more often, actually, we were very lucky to live quite rurally, where there were a lot of good walks on our doorstep, really, and you could pick any direction and just go. So I think that's a love that we as a family have, that my parents taught into us when we were quite young. But I think there comes a point where you have to take up what your parents taught you to do and choose to do it yourself. And I think it was really when I was just becoming a young man, when I was 18, 19, that I think I wanted to go on long walks as a way to push myself physically, and quickly realised that actually there's nothing I enjoy more than spending a weekend just on the hoof.
Yeah, I suppose there's that element of challenge when you have a really long walk and you're going from A to B. It's the sense of kind of pushing yourself. That can be really meaningful. No, that's great. Well, why do you think in that case? Why would you recommend it as an activity to do for our readers, as you did in the magazine, or our listeners who might be listening to this without having read the article? Why should people give it a go? Why would you? Yeah.
I mean, people talk a lot about the benefits of walking at the moment, and about, there's a lot of media about the myriad ways you can get active and stave off health problems in later life from not having moved enough. And I think that's all a good thing. And people talk a lot about the joy that they find in doing their various activities. But I think to some extent there's an interest gap in that you can explain till you're blue in the face why something's interesting to somebody, and you can lead a horse to water, right? But I think if I were to try to suggest to somebody why that should be something they should try, I'd say first of all, try everything once, right? And the sunk cost of getting into walking as a hobby is not exactly the same as getting into anything else. It's very approachable if you're able-bodied, or even if you're not very mobile. It could be very meaningful to travel, say, half a mile in the area around your house and get some fresh air. Or if you're looking for something where you can, as I say, really push yourself, then to me that's the sort of high point of an endurance sport, is multiple days trail hiking and through hiking, and you don't get there without learning to enjoy any amount of time spent walking, whether it's half an hour or a whole day.
Yeah, well, don't walk before you can run, I suppose.
Very true. Very true.
But well, so you mentioned the kind of the rural side of things, and perhaps if both of us grew up very fortunate enough to grow up in the countryside, and so walking, you could say, came as part of that naturally. What about people who live in the city, who maybe don't have as obvious places to walk? You give an example in your article of a city walk you went on that you really enjoyed. How can people who don't have this kind of natural sense of, this is somewhere I want to walk, how can those people get into this hobby?
I think we're quite lucky in the UK that a lot of governments and local authorities publish a lot of information on local footpaths and walks that you can take that are interesting from a historic or a cultural or an ecological standpoint. And there's really no shortage of, living in London, you can just go online and go good walks in London. And there's a website from Transport for London with good long distance footpaths that they maintain that you can walk in sections. I think, as I say, we're quite lucky in the UK, but more generally, you're right that there is a sense that walking in the countryside is maybe more beneficial or is the thing to aim towards, and that walking in the city is a sort of poor substitution. And sometimes I do feel that way. I think that's primarily not because the countryside is necessarily better in any objective sense, but it's because it's what I've grown up with. But, you know, when I'm actually on the hoof going for a walk in the city, I find it very interesting from a historical perspective. And I think having a sense of imagination is a good thing to help make any walk interesting. To walk and go, okay, so what would this have looked like in, I don't know, the 1990s, or what would it have looked like in the 1890s, or whenever it might be, and how do people live here in the here and now? And I think a sense of imagination is something that you can train. It's not just something that you have or you don't. And that going for these walks in different places, not just through fields and forests, but past warehouses and dockyards and, you know, big apartment blocks and rows of terraced houses, it trains your sense of imagination. And that I find really rewarding.
Nice. Yeah, I can imagine you sort of, you as you walk through an area, you feel the sense of what did this used to look like? What are the lives of these people who live here right now? What are they like? Or what were the lives of people before this big apartment block was built, and so on. I can see that. And you mentioned there also that element of history. So you're a historian by training. How do you think? Could you go into a bit more detail about how your love of history and your love of walking kind of intersect? What influence do they have on each other? Is it a two-way thing? Can you go into a bit more detail about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of what I do is, and what I enjoy doing in my free time, is historically informed. It's a way to think about the way that people lived historically, and also an understanding of how people lived in the past is a way to think about life now. Whether that be walking or cooking, and I hope one day gardening, currently not very practical in a top floor flat. But a lot of the hobbies that I most enjoy have that historical dimension sort of front and centre, or I suppose I might say they did when I was younger. So when I was sort of 18, 19, it was very much, I want to cook this historical recipe, I want to walk this historical path, I want to do this, that and the other. And in this day and age, when I go for a walk or when I cook something, it's much more, what's it like to do this now? How can I step back and look at me walking through this park where people hang out and drink drinks from the supermarket and eat little packaged sandwiches on a 21st century summer's afternoon? And how can I think about the place that has in history? And it's the same with cooking the same food that I eat every day. And I feel like I have gained a lot in terms of the way that I look at my life from my historical training. But I think the most important things that I've learned, that I carry with me all the time, didn't come from a book or a university education. They came from the people who live it, whether it's on making passion project videos on YouTube or working on living archaeological sites, whether they're here or in America, or reenactments or whatever it might be. And it's that keeping history alive that you can access without a university education that, as I say, I think has been most meaningful to me.
Oh, okay. What kind of do you have any examples of any particular sort of points of impact that you really feel like walking or any of this deeper historical sense of imagination has had on your ordinary life, how you look at the world or how you look at the life you lead in the everyday?
I think the thing that probably most of my friends would pick out about me is how interested I am by the variety of trees in any given area, whether I'm walking through the city or whether I'm out in the forest or in the countryside or something like that. And people are always very willing to sort of point out when I walk somewhere and I go, there are a lot of birch trees here. I wonder if they're native to the area because there aren't many birch trees in the surrounding woods or whatever it might be. And I think a lot of it is that it's the sort of very, some would say dry or at least quaint kind of ecological eye. Because I think ecology is something that we as people are, in this day and age, very aware of the fact that we can have these giant sort of cataclysmic impacts on, but that we're less attuned to the ways that people have shaped the world that we walk through and the species that inhabit it in the day-to-day interactions, in terms of why is that tree there, or why is it that these birds like nesting in this park but not in that one. And it's that kind of little, the very parochial wonder of not why is the world like this, but why is this little square mile like this, that to me is endlessly interesting. I think you can very easily walk through a field or a forest and say that it's a lot like a field or a forest somewhere else, especially if you live in a country that doesn't have much climatic variety. But I think it's the noticing of the little signposts and fence posts and the different wildflowers and that sort of thing that to me is almost an inexhaustible supply of interest.
And do you find that the more you walk, the more you see these little things that otherwise you wouldn't? Or is it more that the walking has actualized this sense that you already feel like you had in other areas?
It's definitely something that you learn by doing.
Right.
It's only when you've walked along the edge of 10 different wheat fields when you can walk along an 11th and go, the plant border along the hedge here is slightly different in character to the way that it normally is. I've not seen these little black seed pods or something like that before. And again, I appreciate that this is all quite sort of dry and ecological, but I think the same is true of a lot of things. You can walk through a lot of inner city environments and go, the streets here are wider than they are in the surrounding area. I wonder why. Or the windows of the buildings here have a different character. I think a lot of walking for me is an avenue to learn and to then explore those sort of little observations, and it doesn't at all have to be, sat there with a book on how to identify different species. It can just be very much a blue sky sense of, I've noticed this place is different to this place and now I'm curious about why.
That's so interesting. And do you find that, because I also love walking, and I often find that I go for a walk, especially if I've been working that day or if I've had a long week or whatever, I'll go for a walk, and my walking is a way of almost turning off, in a sense. I'll go for a walk and I'll be kind of pacing it out, and I just clear my head and get out into the fresh air and sort of leave all my worries behind almost. From the sound of things, it's almost like you have the opposite experience of, you go for a walk and something inside you gets turned on, that you have this new awareness that you didn't have before. Is that a fair way of describing it, do you think?
I think you're exactly right, that walking, especially walking somewhere where I haven't walked before, is a very active experience for me. And it is, to some extent, effortful. And, I think in that regard that a change is as good as a rest, and I find myself very equipped to go and deal with another week ahead with a smile on my face if I've spent the time on the weekend to do something like that. But a lot of people would find, I suppose just as I might find doing something quite fiddly and manual like embroidery or something like that, I might find that quite effortful, but not so enlivening and fulfilling. And I think a lot of people have that relationship with walking, and ultimately what I don't want to do is to stand on a little soapbox about how walking is the best thing for everybody to do. I think it's a great thing for a lot of people to do, and that if you like the sound of the way that I talk about walking or that other people do, then, and you're curious, then absolutely make some time for a few weekends to go and do it. But if it doesn't fill you with that kind of rejuvenating energy, then find something else that does.
Yeah, and I suppose in addition to all the other kind of hobbies that you mentioned, it's also one of the most accessible hobbies, isn't it? Because obviously, depending on people's physical constraints or whatever, it's one of those things that requires the least prior knowledge, ability, what have you, to just go for a walk if you feel like it. I found the title of your article very interesting, because you called it "Walking the Land," and I thought that had a very strong set of connotations to me. I'm not sure why, of almost a sense of nostalgia, or certainly a kind of rootedness. It's like you're not just walking for the sake of walking, you're walking through a kind of particular place, and that place is the land, and the land is somehow something that is enriching you or whatever. Like, how do you think the particular places you go to enrich your love of walking through that area, or do you feel a kind of sense of rootedness when you're walking somewhere as opposed to cycling or driving through that area or whatever?
I do, and I think a big part of it comes from what I mentioned before, that a lot of what I like about going for a walk is the sort of very unique, particular and parochial character of a particular small area. When I wrote the article and went for my walk down from Woolwich around east and southeast London, it was very much a sense to me of, okay, this isn't where I'm from and it isn't where I live, and I'm here as, it's not somewhere that I spend time walking functionally. I don't walk from the office to the pub here or something like that. So it's quite foreign to me, and I'm a visitor, and I like to be gracious, and I'd like to try and get a sense of what it is that the people who live here are like, and what the physical environment that they live in is like. And so I think, yes, it is quite rooted for me. And it's also, you compared it to walking or cycle. You compared it to driving or cycling or something like that. And I think that's a really useful comparison, because a lot of people really enjoy cycling or driving as a way to get to know somewhere. And that has never had that appeal to me. I've tried, and it's not been something that's ever stuck with me so much. And I think it's because I find walking to be a much more human scale. And also, I suppose, from a historical standpoint, it's easier to go, okay, how would people have walked through here where I'm walking through here, 50, 20, 100, 1,000 years ago? What would it have looked like? I don't know, but I can imagine. And if you're driving or cycling, I find that it severs the thread a little bit. Like you say, walking is very accessible, and it's very accessible through time as well. It's one of the things that people have always been doing. And so I think doing it in a place really connects you with the people who live there in a way that few other things do. And I think that's one of the reasons I like historical cookery so much as well, is because it does exactly that. It's one of those very accessible human experiences.
Yeah, it sort of unites you to, if you have an idea, if an area hasn't changed very much and you know what it would have felt like to walk through that area, and you're just engaging in the same activity, it's similar to eating the same food as someone 200, 300 years ago, it gives you a sense of like uniting you across time in ways that those people would have no idea about, that there'll be people 200, 300 years hence who would be walking down the same places or eating the same food and thinking back. And I guess it's the same for in the future. We never know the walks that we go on, what people will walk down these paths in future, what life stories will they have, what experiences will they have had. That's very interesting. There was another thing that I found really interesting in your article, which was that when you talked about the end of your walk, so you mentioned the sense of relief as you were approaching your destination, and a kind of a fondness, or almost an anticipated fondness. So you knew that you would feel really good as soon as you got back from that walk, feel like you sort of achieved something. I think any of us who've been for a long hike will know what that feels like, right? And there's all these kind of stereotypes of putting your feet up by the fire, or going to the pub for a pint after a 6-mile walk in the summer or whatever it might be. What do you think the effect is of this kind of nostalgia, or maybe memory is a better word, the memory of the walk that you've been on, and especially in the sort of immediate aftermath of that walk and the sense of tiredness in your legs, how much do you think that's part of the main enjoyment of walking, and how does that relate with the actual enjoyment of the walking itself, of the process, so to speak?
It's an interesting question, because I think in that regard, the walk that I wrote about for the magazine is atypical for me. I was quite tired. I'd come off a late night with some friends, and it was long and it was cold. I wasn't walking with anybody. And all of these are things that are often completely fine as part of my way of walking, but to bring them together with, as I say, being just absolutely knackered after the previous day, it wasn't a walk that I was so conscious of enjoying at the time. It was very much a case of, okay, I'm here, I'm plodding along, I'm taking this all in, and I know that it's interesting, and I'm sure when I've had a chance to rest, I'll be able to think on it and realise just how interesting and exciting it all is. But I think usually I would say no, memory doesn't play a big role in walking for me, and it's not the case that I'm not at the gym, right? I'm not putting myself through something that's difficult and that I don't enjoy for the sake of satisfaction afterwards. And for a lot of people, that's not their experience of the gym either. You know, it's one of those things where, for me, the walking itself is where I feel happiest, and whatever I'm doing day in, day out, whether I'm at leisure with friends, whether I'm working on something that I really enjoy or something that just pays the bills or whatever it might be, I'm always happiest moment to moment when I'm then able to get away from it and just go for a walk, and to spend as much time as possible doing that in the course of my evening or weekend. So no, I think I walk an awful lot, and I don't tend to look back on walks that I went on and go, wow, that was absolutely wonderful. I'm really glad I did that. I tend to just go on to the next thing and the next thing. And I can't speak of how typical an experience that is, but I think that's part of what I like about walking in the first place, is that not only is it different everywhere you go, and not only is it different when you do it and who you do it with, it's different for each person to do, as you know, in yourself as well. And some people really like walking with headphones in, and I can't stand it. I can't listen to music or a podcast or anything like that. And I think it's one of those things that's quite, as I say, quite a deeply human experience to me, that we can all enjoy it in different ways, but that ultimately we can all still enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're definitely right there as well, that everybody has their own. If you were to ask these same questions to a group of other people, they would all come up with very different answers. I have a friend, for example, who's a big walker, who always walks with a book in one coat pocket and a cassette player in her other pocket, so that she can listen to music, and then every so often she'll just take out her book and read for 5 minutes while walking. And I can't imagine anything more horrifying, like all these different bits of attention rather than looking out, but she likes it. So, okay, well, one other potentially controversial point for walkers. Do you prefer walking on your own or with friends? And why?
They're very different, and for a long time I thought that I preferred walking by myself. But I think that was largely because I was walking, the people who I knew who were willing to walk with me they approached walking in a different way to how I do. You know, we've just spoken about how it's very different for different people, and that was absolutely true for most of my friends and family. And so I found it frustrating to kind of be pulled between different visions of what we wanted out of an afternoon. And I think maybe to some extent that speaks of a reluctance to compromise on my part. But I've certainly, I think I know what I'm getting myself in for more when I walk on my own, which in some ways makes it more exciting to walk with other people. Right. And I've started to cohere around me a group of people who like walking in a similar way to the way that I like walking, and who like stopping for the same things and noticing similar things. And that's really made me realise how wonderful it is to walk with other people. I've really enjoyed that, and it's been an education. It continues to be.
Wonderful. Do you find that the conversations you have while walking are different in any way than from conversations you might be having with the same friends in different situations? Or is it more just the fact that you're having these conversations in this setting when you have so much else going on, that brings something out of people? What do you think?
I think I'm generally quite a serious person anyway, but I think when I walk with friends, the conversation is more serious and, dare I say, intellectual, whatever that might mean. Again, one of those wonderful things that differs from person to person.
Yeah.
But I think there are a lot of there's a comic impulse in conversation when you're sat around with friends, or when you're walking from the office to the station or something, which isn't there so much when you're out walking, I find. And I really value that. I really enjoy getting in the car or on the train or just back home after a long walk and being able to, we spoke about memory a little bit ago, and I said that it doesn't play a big role in my appreciation of walking, but that is something that I like to be able to look back on and to think to myself, we've had some wonderfully interesting conversations, which I think walking, I wouldn't say it makes you patient necessarily, but I would say that it demonstrates to you that you are patient. It's easy to forget the reserves of patience that you have as a human being, at least I find this. Yeah. And walking reminds you of those. And I think that leads itself to really good conversation.
And I suppose if you're going for a several hour long walk with a person or a couple of people, there's almost a captive audience sense there that you have to work out how to get on with this person for the next few hours. But equally there's possibly an openness to actually have the kind of conversation that you couldn't have in half an hour. Because you're going into such sort of nitty-gritty or so much detail that you really need to start wrestling it out. And you're not afraid that person's going to get up and walk away, because where would they go? No, that's interesting. I personally find as well that you have a lot of freedom when you're... Well, I suppose this counts for any activity you do together with people, but if you're doing something together like walking, you're getting from point A to B, you have freedom to be silent, which is quite nice. That there's there isn't that impulse to fill every moment with conversation, which means when you do speak, it's usually because you have something that is either worth saying or at least you consider is worth saying, which means conversations can be more interesting. Nice, okay. How about in terms of location? Do you have any favourite walks that you've been on or that you particularly like to go on? Anything that particularly stands out as something you recommend?
Well, I mean, my favourite place to go walking has always been the countryside of West Dorset. It's always been where I grew up. Very hilly, tiny little chalk streams, but no such thing as what you might call a river, and hard to find a planted field. It's all pasture or meadow or forest. And it's coastal too. I think it has everything, and more people are starting to recognise that, as is evidenced by how busy the car parks are in the summer. But at the moment, I'm getting a lot out of going to the national parks that are within a drive of London to drive to for the day and then come back on the same day, which to me is about a 2-hour drive, is something that you might consider reasonable. So I'm spending a lot of time in the South Downs, which I really, really like. If you like real ale, then I'm beginning to learn that the South East is an absolutely wonderful place to spend time, especially around Sussex. And that's coastal as well. I like a lot of that kind of chalky upland. I think, as I say, it reminds me of home.
Yeah, and there's something lovely about rolling hills. You're not just walking along flat, but you sort of, you have the strenuous, you have to get up the hill, and then suddenly you have a lovely view, and you have the gentle downhill before you have to go up again. That's something quite nice about that. Nice. Okay. Well, we're reaching the end of our time. Before we go, do you have any final tips for our readers who maybe now have become convinced of maybe I should go for a walk? Do you have any suggestions for practical things they could do to get started?
I think I would stress, as I said earlier, don't feel like it has to be for you. I think a lot of people treat walking at the moment the same way they treat reading, which is, I don't do very much of it and I should be doing more. I think if you come at it from a perspective of a guilt that you're trying to remedy, then you're probably not going to get anywhere with it. Ultimately, it's about doing what you enjoy doing in the day-to-day, rather than because you think it will make you a more well-rounded person in the long term. That's at least been my perspective. And I think if you like the sound of going for a good walk, get a lightweight raincoat and get comfortable with being wet, especially if you live in the UK.
Yeah.
Decide whether you want to walk in boots or trainers, because the trainer crowd are really taking over the conversation at the moment. That's a raging debate in the walking scene. Mm-hmm. But no, I think if you like the idea of going for a walk somewhere, I think what's standing in the way of all of us when there's something that we'd like to do is time. So be proactive. Don't just hope that it'll happen to you. Block out a Saturday and go online, go on a walking, or even don't just go on a walking forum, just Google good walks near me and find what you want to start with. I like filling my time with 20-mile, 10-hour walks, but other people prefer filling their time with shorter walks, and it's trial and error. It's trial and error.
Yeah, absolutely. So just get out there, see what you enjoy. Hopefully there will be people watching this or having read the article who will find that this kindles a lot of walking. If that's not you, don't worry, but hopefully there will be those people. So thank you very much, Jake. If you didn't get the chance, make sure you pick up a copy of our March issue. You can find it on our website, in addition to our latest June issue, which has Jake's article in it. And also, if this has inspired you and you want to give a hike a go and you're not sure where to begin, there will in fact be a Bedrock hike coming up in August. So make sure all the details for that are actually in our June issue, because it's only for Bedrock subscribers, very exclusive. So make sure you pick up a copy of that if you'd like to go on that hike, and we'll see you there. Thank you very much.
Certainly will. Thank you.